Guys, how is everybody? I want to welcome all of our campuses as I do every week. I want to welcome those of you who watch online. And of course, I want to welcome our Weekends on Wednesday service. Surprisingly, they actually have more energy tonight or today than they normally do. And that is because we have had a good time eating. There's a big old potluck happening. I thought it was going to be me and my mom this week, and she said to me, my mom, she's like, well, what's wrong with that? But we've got a crew here today, and I thank you all for being here. So here's the deal. We are in a series that we started several weeks ago at the beginning of summer called Old School, and every week what we're doing, right before the talk, we're showing these cheesy old school videos, but then the premise of each of our talks is we're actually going into the Old Testament. We're looking at stories and individuals and life lessons from the first part of the Bible. Now, most of what we're looking at was written 4,000 years ago, which raises the question, why in the world are we spending a summer looking at these really, really old and ancient writings that, quite honestly, is more about the history of the Jewish people and was used to guide and direct them, shows God working in them. Why are we looking at something that really pertains way more to Jewish people than a lot of us would think it pertains to ourselves? And it goes to the big idea of this series. Here it is, that the more you know about the past, the better prepared you are for the future. The more we understand about the past, the more lessons we carry with us, whether it's financial lessons, moral lessons, ethical lessons, lessons about relationships, the more we carry with us from the past, the better prepared we are for the future. Now, in 1997, I took a trip to the nation of Haiti, and it marked my life forever. And it marked it in different ways. But when I went in 1997, I went with a group of people. It was a mission trip. I realized how naive I was as an American. And the reason I say that is because I showed up with about maybe $5, $10 in my pocket total for the trip, but I did have a credit card, and that's what I was relying on to get me through an entire week. Well, having been there just a couple of hours, I went up to a food stand to order some food, and I pulled out my credit card, and they said, yeah, we're not taking that here. All right, we do not take credit cards. Do you have cash? And then I realized I'm going to have to borrow money all week long. So sure enough, I did. From my buddies, I would have to borrow money, and I'd have to keep meticulous records of how much I owed everybody because I was just used to living in America, right? I didn't realize how different it was in another part of our world. In fact, I went to buy a Coca-Cola, and they opened the bottle, and I walked out of the little stand with it, and they chased me down. And they said, no, drink it here. And then they took the bottle from me right then because it was like an instant recycle. All right, this wasn't take it home type of deal. Then we got to the place where we were staying, and again, I was shocked because I had never been at a place without air conditioning, and this was the heat of the summer that I was there. When it came time for showers, the water we had was not heated water. It was water actually that was collected on the roof in buckets in these huge bins, and that's how we got the water. It was just freezing cold water. And bottom line, I'm telling you all this because when we flew back into Miami airport, I literally, in a dramatic way, and I knew I was being dramatic, I got down on my knees and I kissed the ground of the airport. And I said, I love America. Now, the first week of July every year is a big week for our country. We don't just celebrate July 4th. We celebrate all week long with this adoption of the Declaration of Independence. And we celebrate with food and with friends. We celebrate with fireworks. We celebrate with hot dog eating contests, right? We have all of these different things to celebrate what we call our birthday. Does anybody know how old we are this year?
242.
242 years old. Way to go, yeah. So that's how old we are as a country. So we love to celebrate our country, but the one thing I think most of us have learned to do in various settings is to be very, very careful in talking about our country. Right? We know that the topic of our country and our government and politics can become a very toxic thing. And the reason for that is because whenever we talk about our country or whenever we hear things about our country, there's always some sort of filter that people have. The CNN filter, the Fox News, the MSNBC filter, right? We have the Republican filter, the Libertarian filter, the Democrat filter. We've got the white filter and the black filter and the Mexican filter and the Native American filter and the Asian filter. Like, we have so many filters when we talk about our country. And so what I'm going to ask you to do in the next little bit here is I'm going to ask you to do your best to set aside whatever filter you have. Because I'm going to do something today that I don't remember ever doing at Great Lakes Church, and that is I'm going to talk about our country. And I'm going to talk about what it looks like to follow Jesus while living in this country. And so again, if you could do your best to put aside your filters for a little bit. Now, the thing I love most about our country, and the thing that I know so many of you love most, if we were really to talk about it and break it down, is something called the Bill of Rights. Okay? This is something that our forefathers put together and they spent time on and they just went through and they wrote out things that we, as a country, as faded as it is, that's the original document, as faded as it is, the things that we felt like, man, we want to value here in America. And so let's just walk through them because obviously we can't read this. As Americans, we have the freedom of speech. That means I get up and say whatever I want to say, and you get to say whatever you want to say. And I can talk about your mama, and I can go on Facebook and write things passive-aggressively to people, and they can do the same to me, and I can block you, and you can block me, and all that fun stuff. That's what it means to be American. Then we have the freedom of press. The press can say whatever they want to about the government, and nobody has to worry about getting thrown into jail as long as it's the truth, right? Then we have the freedom of assembly. We get to gather in church settings. We get to gather in groups and in clubs and around different interests. We have the freedom of religion. Our government cannot force us to believe certain things. They can't force a certain religion upon us. They can't interrupt the way we worship God. Then we have the right to bear arms. And I won't say much about this because this is where we all have a lot of filters, right? One way or the other. And so I'll just say this. As Americans, according to the Bill of Rights, we have the right to own firearms for self-defense. Then we have the right for due process. We are, in our country, considered innocent until proven guilty, and our government has to follow procedures in any kind of trial. Then we have the right to a jury trial. We have a right to the trial of our peers. I think you know this. There are countries around the world, they do not have this kind of freedom and this kind of trial. Then we have the right to protect ourselves from search and seizure, meaning nobody can show up to our door without a warrant and just search our house or search what's on our person, right? We have a right that protects us from cruel and unusual punishment. We're not going to be tortured. We don't have to live in that fear. Again, there are citizens in other countries who have to worry. We do not have to worry. And then we have this right that protects us from the quartering of soldiers, which basically means someone in the military, a Marine, someone in the Army, someone in the Air Force cannot show up to your house and demand that you feed them and clothe them and give them a place to stay. Right? If they do that, you can refuse that and not have to worry about the consequences. So we have all types of rights. And if the Bill of Rights were written today, it would look very different. Right at the top of our Bill of Rights, I'm sure we would put the right to free Wi-Fi. Right? The right to coffee, the right to have a Chick-fil-A on every third block, right? We'd have all of these ridiculous things. And I'm sure we'd put some really serious things in there like the right to free education because we become accustomed to that. And we would put the right to, maybe some would put the right to free health care. And we could argue and we could debate about what would go in that Bill of Rights, but it would look different today if we wrote it. And the really cool thing about our forefathers is they actually had the foresight to know this. When they put together the Bill of Rights, they actually have an amendment in that bill that basically says, hey, we realize that the rights we wrote out do not include all human rights. There are definitely rights that are not written in this document, and we respect that. And so here we are in 2018, and if we were really to articulate the way most of us feel about our rights, here's what we would say. I have the right to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want, as long as it doesn't interfere with anyone else's rights. Now, we wouldn't say it that way and maybe that bold, but that's how so many of us think. And yet here's the problem. Every parent knows this. If you give someone rights, but you do not couple those rights with responsibility, things go south very, very quickly. So let me just have little bit of confession time here. How many of you, and at our different campuses, I want you to raise your hand as well, how many of you will admit that while you were growing up, at some point, when you were in the driving years, 16, 17, 18 years old, your parents took the car keys away from you? All right, only a couple at our weekends on Wednesday gathering. All right, this is a really good, well-behaved gathering. All right, for those who had the keys taken away, basically what your parents were communicating is you have a right. That right is now taken away because you were not responsible. All right, how about this one? How many of you, at any point growing up, your parents took the door off of your bedroom? All right, again, a couple. In my house, if you were to have come to my house for any of the last 3 years, all right, I've got a couple teenagers. If you were to come to my house in the last 3 years, at any point in those 3 years, I promise you one of the doors in my house would have been off. Because you can have rights, but if you are not showing responsibility, those rights are somehow taken away from you, right? Freedom without responsibility leads to recklessness. And so individual rights must be coupled with individual responsibility. Which leads me to this question. Why is it we have a Constitution, we have a Bill of Rights, we have a Declaration of Independence, we have all these fancy documents. Why is it that we do not have a Bill of Responsibilities? Why is it we do not have a Bill of Responsibilities? Well, my guess is it's because the forefathers, and this is seen all throughout their documents, if you can remember back to history class, the forefathers assumed at some level that people were going to evidence responsibility. But here we are 242 years later, and I think we could say we haven't always done a great job with being responsible, which is why with the freedoms we have, there have literally been thousands upon thousands upon thousands of laws attached to those freedoms to kind of keep us in line. I mean, just think of all the laws we've had to come up with to provide some sort of framework and structure to our freedoms. When it comes to gun control laws, there are anywhere between 300 and 400 laws just on that one topic alone. And the reason there are so many laws is because as human beings, this is natural for all of us, we're always looking for loopholes. If I'm honest, I don't ever want to believe anything's ever my fault. I don't ever want to take responsibility. I'm just going to excuse everything away. So I'm going to tell you, I had a rough upbringing, right? I didn't get a good education. My parents didn't hug me enough. I'm predispositioned a certain way. This is my race. This is my nationality. So this is just who I am. This is just what I do. I took a Myers-Briggs personality test. I found out I was a J-E-R-K or a P-E-R-V. That's just who I am. I cannot help it. And so our government consequently has spent just so much time over the years. It just consumes what they do, creating law after law after law, because they really got to think of almost every possibility of what an American might think of or do in trying to find a loophole. So a few years ago, there was a judge in Washington, D.C. He actually tried to sue, brought him to court, a small dry cleaning company. And the reason he sued them was because they promised same-day service and satisfaction guaranteed. Well, they lost his pants. They couldn't find his pants. So sure enough, brings him to court and tries to sue him for $54 million. He did not win. But again, it's easy to point. It's easy to blame. A couple years ago, a lady in Utah, she tried to sue Google because she used Google Maps for one of her walks, and she ended up walking onto a busy highway, and she got hit. And so instead of saying, I should have seen that I was walking onto a highway, she blamed Google Maps. This is how, again, we naturally think as humans, but much more as Americans. Right? When it comes to laws, we say, well, that one's not specifically covered, so I'm off the hook. You didn't say it exactly that way. I mean, the words you used, they weren't the exact words, so you've got to let me go. Right? That wasn't spelled out clearly with those specific phrases, so you can't penalize me. Nah, 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 nah. And in our culture, everybody is looking for a loophole because our only accountability, as far as we're concerned, is to government and to the written law. Now, obviously, laws are a good thing, right? We need laws. But the law represents the minimum requirement. The law answers the question, how low can I go? Right? How fast can I drive without getting pulled over? How fast can I drive and get pulled over but only get a warning? How fast can I drive and get pulled over and maybe even get a ticket but not get my license taken away? Just a few days ago, there was a guy in Indiana. He was driving 120 miles an hour through a construction zone. He gets pulled over and he asks the police officer to please consider just giving him a warning. Instead, the police officer brought him to jail. But that's the question. Where's the line? What's the limit? How far can I go without being arrested? How much can I get away with without going to prison? How flexible are the laws? How flexible are the standards? What can I get by with? The bottom line is that the law does not inspire greatness. The law doesn't inspire excellence. It doesn't create virtue. The law basically just asks the question, how low can I go? What is the bottom line? So traffic laws, they're important, but they're not going to make us courteous drivers. Tax laws are important, they're necessary, but they're not going to make us generous, and they're not going to make us financially responsible. Civil laws are not going to make us civil. Homeowner association rules are not going to make us good homeowners or great neighbors. Free speech doesn't mean that we're going to be kind and thoughtful with the words we use. Laws are powerless to inspire. Right? They're not going to inspire you to have a great marriage. They're not going to motivate you to work hard at your job. They're not going to motivate you to be a person of character. Quite honestly, not only is the law powerless to do those type of things, it's not even the job of the law. And so as a result, here we are. We have individual rights that in so many different nations and countries wish they had. We have so many rights, but we have thousands upon thousands and thousands of laws to make sure we don't abuse those rights. And so our thinking is, hey, now, as long as I stay within the boundaries, I'm free to do whatever I want to do. I can say whatever I want to say. I can go wherever I want to go, hang out with whoever I want to hang out with, sleep with whoever I want to sleep with. I can go on Facebook and I can be cruel with my words. I can take off my clothes whenever I want. I can protest a soldier's funeral. I can heckle the president. I can keep people out of my business. I can do whatever I want. I mean, we have got so many incredible laws, and yet we can still be as selfish as we choose to be. We live in an amazing country, a country that all of us love. But without taking personal responsibility, rights become nothing more than an opportunity to power up on other people. And so we can lie to people and take advantage of people and belittle people, and there's nothing the government can do about it. Now, I don't know if you realize this, but as we've been talking about the Old Testament, again, thousands of years old in the writing, some of them 3,000, 4,000 years old. The Old Testament is a collection. It's not one book. It's a collection of 39 different documents. 39 different manuscripts written by various authors, written in various time periods and in different genres. And the original manuscripts were actually, many of them, written on scrolls. Okay, this is how the Old Testament was, what it was written on. This is how they were read, where it was read off of scrolls. Well, the Old Testament is filled with laws. Laws that were a guiding light to the Jewish community. Do not kill, do not steal, do not cut your hair into a mullet, right? Ridiculous thing. And it wasn't that ridiculous, that's an exaggeration, but there were some ridiculous laws, like do not eat owls, do not wear clothes with two different kinds of fabric, don't shave the sides of your hair. And I wish we had time to get into some of the background for some of those laws, but we don't. But here's why I'm bringing this up. If you're at all familiar with the fact that the Old Testament is filled with lots of laws, in fact, more than 600 of them, then you know this, that it gets overwhelming reading them and feeling like, man, people had to follow these laws and become accustomed to knowing them and understand them. Not all of the laws are ridiculous, like don't eat owl, right? Some of the laws, in fact, many of them, actually had to do with how we treated people. In fact, Leviticus 19 is jam-packed with laws. I'm just going to summarize some of those laws for you so you see how much emphasis was placed on the way we treat people. Here we go. Again, this is just a summary of them. Live generously towards the poor and the immigrant. Do not steal from anyone. Do not be deceptive in dealings with people. Do not use the name of God to manipulate people. Do not oppress, rob, or exploit the poor by paying unfair wages. Do not mock those who are disabled. Do not be partial to the poor or show favor to those who are wealthy, but judge honestly. Do not slander others. Do not hate other people. Do not seek revenge or hold a grudge. So over and over and over, all these different laws. And then ultimately, they're summarized with this law. Love your neighbor as yourself. To love my neighbor as myself requires me to stop looking for the loopholes and to stop considering how low can I go and how much can I get by with. If I'm going to love my neighbor as myself, at some point I have got to ask myself the question, how am I going to leverage my freedom in a way that benefits other people? How am I going to leverage my opportunities in a way that blesses other people? How am I going to leverage my resources in a way that honors other people? It is true that as Americans, we have so many freedoms. We can say what we want. We can hang out with who we want. We can do what we want and go where we want. We have so many freedoms. But if you are a follower of Jesus, if you would say, I have made the decision to follow Jesus, then all throughout the ancient scriptures, we are called to leverage what we have, leverage our opportunities, leverage our resources, leverage our time, leverage our energy. We are called to leverage what we have for the sake of other people. And so here's the question I want us to consider today. How am I going to leverage my freedom? How am I going to leverage my freedom? I'm going to leverage my freedom to love my neighbor. I'm going to do to others what I wish they would do to me. I'm going to treat my girlfriend the way I hope that young men treat my sister when they date her. I'm going to treat my coworkers the way I wish my coworkers would have treated me at the last job I was at. I'm going to treat my employees the way I wish my boss would have treated me. I'm going to treat my boss the way I want to be treated as a boss. I am going to go through life and I'm going to try to have this lens of how I want to be treated, and I'm going to do just that. If all of us would use the freedoms we have in that way, there really wouldn't be much of a need for laws. Because it wouldn't all be about loopholes and fine print and all the details that have been written down over the years. It would be about, I'm not really interested in that because I'm not thinking about myself. I'm trying to figure out ways that I can leverage it for other people. Now, I know this sounds idealistic. And I know this sounds like La La Land, and it sounds like some made-up fairy tale that we would ever be able to get to this point. But this is following Jesus 101. This is the very basic and the very core and the very essence of what it means to follow Jesus. This ancient law, love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus put it this way in one of his teachings. He said, do to others what you want them to do to you. We know it as the golden rule. And if we forget that we're a part of a community, if we forget that we're supposed to leverage our freedom and our rights for the sake of other people, all we will do, whether it's intentional or unintentional, is we're going to go through life and we're going to fuel the greed and we're going to fuel the anger and we're going to fuel the selfishness and we're going to fuel the hatred that so often is evidenced in the different news stories we read and we watch unfolding in our country. In 1 Kings chapter 21, we read a fascinating story about a guy named Ahab. Ahab was the king of Israel. He had way more money, way more influence, way more power than he knew what to do with. He was regularly building cities and palaces, and he lived in a wonderful palace, and next to the palace there was this vineyard that he wanted. And so he decided to approach the owner of the vineyard because he did not own it. And he decided he was going to give him not just a fair offer, he was going to give him a better than fair offer. So he approaches the owner of the vineyard, a guy named Naboth, and he says, Naboth, here's what that property is worth. You know it and I know it. I want to buy it from you, but I'm going to give you way more than it's worth. So he offers him this great amount of money. And Naboth says to him, he says, man, that's a way more than fair price. Thank you so much. He said, I don't want to be offensive to you, but here's the deal, King. He says, this is property been in my family for years. I'm not going to sell it to you. It'd be offensive to my family to do that, so I'm not going to sell it to you. So King Ahab, throws this temper tantrum, and he's upset, and he goes back to his palace. Well, his wife, Jezebel, sees him upset. And so she asks him, why are you so upset? He said, 'cause I tried to buy the property from Naboth, and he's not going to sell it to me. Here's how she responded. Are you the king of Israel or not? Jezebel demanded. Get up and eat something, and don't worry about it. I'll get you Naboth's vineyard. See, Jezebel knows she's got power and influence. She knows that she can use it for herself and for her husband. And so she comes up with this elaborate plan, and it's just a really bizarre plan. She actually has this huge party in which Naboth is actually honored. And she's celebrating Naboth and the kind of person he is. But what he doesn't realize is she has a couple plants in the audience. And so a couple guys stand up in the midst of this party, and they start accusing Naboth of blasphemy against God and of treason against the king and against country. Well, this is stuff that eventually gets him killed. I mean, this is House of Cards. She did him dirty right there, right? She is betraying and lying. And so at the end of the story, he ends up dying, and King Ahab ends up buying the property. So here's a king with more money and power and influence than he knows what to do with. Again, he built palaces and cities. He chose to use his money and his power and his influence and his wealth. He chose to use it and leverage it for himself. Jezebel chose to leverage it for herself. And at the end of their life, things do not go well for them. In fact, Ahab ends up dying in a battle against Syria. Jezebel ends up getting thrown off this huge tower, and she dies, and her body's eaten by animals. It's just a crazy, crazy story. And when we read it, we're like, dude, that's just ridiculous. Why in the world would Ahab and Jezebel do that, take advantage of other people? Because it's so easy to see this attitude in other people. It's not easy to see in ourselves. Right? It's hard for me to accept the fact that sometimes I do that with the time, the money, the energy, the power, the influence, or whatever that God's given me. As Americans, it's easy to leverage our freedoms for ourselves. Right? I was here first, so it's my right. I was here second, but I'm more powerful than you. Oh, the law says, so I'm going to go get a lawyer. And I am going to get the biggest, baddest, meanest, ugliest lawyer I can find, and I am going to sue you for everything you are worth. If we're all going to live for our individual rights, every man for himself, every woman for herself, every family for themselves, every community for themselves, we are going to destroy each other. But if we can be intentional about leveraging our freedoms for the sake of other people, we will be a catalyst of hope and healing and restoration in our country. I'm not saying everything's going to be happily ever after, but we can bring that hope and that healing and restoration to our communities and our neighborhoods. Instead of asking how low can I go or what can I get by with, the question we ought to be asking is how high can I reach and how can I best leverage what God's trusted me with? And it really does start by embracing this ancient Jewish law written thousands of years ago. Love your neighbor as yourself. Well, 1,500 years after this law was written, Jesus was talking to his followers about love. And he raises the bar for them. Here's what he says. He says, so now I am giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. So everyone was used to love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, now I don't just want you to love your neighbor as yourself. I want you to love your neighbor as I have loved you. That's a whole nother level. And it has so many implications that we don't have time to get into in this specific talk. But I will say this, if you want to take the words of Jesus seriously, I'm going to wrap up our time together by giving you a couple ideas on how you can do it. And it starts by creating a bill of responsibilities. Of saying, man, I'm going to leverage the freedoms I have, and I'm going to have some responsibilities that I take very seriously. Here's the first one. Do what is helpful. Do what's helpful. I'm going to leverage my freedom to do what's helpful to others. Imagine how shocked your coworkers would be if when you had a little bit extra time and a little bit of extra energy, you said, man, I see you're swamped, and I see you're going to have to spend some time this weekend working on this project, so what can I do to help? Imagine if you looked at your partner and you said, hey, I know it's not on my to-do list, and I know it's not part of my responsibilities, but I see your swamp right now. What can I do to help? If you're a teenager, imagine asking your parents when you see them a little bit overwhelmed, what can I do to help? Now, you might have to end up visiting them in the hospital because they'll have fainted, but the very fact you asked the question. What can I do to help? Last year, I think all of us would remember Hurricane Harvey. Did a lot of devastation in many of the southern states. And of course, there are people when that happened that rush in and they help and they're there to assist and aid. Well, I asked our church at the time if we would be willing to partner with a church in the Houston area who many of their members had been affected. And I just kind of expressed the need and said, hey, so here's the address you can send help to, and here's the different items that they need. Well, it was several months after that where the pastor of that church called me and he said, hey, Dave, thank you to Great Lakes Church. He said, I'm just going to be straight with you. He said, we had lots of churches and organizations and people partner with us, and people were very, very generous. He said, but I'm telling you the truth, Great Lakes Church led the way in generosity. He said, we received so much stuff from the members of Great Lakes Church. Now, I'll just be straight with you. Nobody had to do that. Right? We're Americans. Nobody forced us, right? I have the right to say I'm not going to help. That's not an attitude of looking for loopholes. That's not an attitude of saying, how low can I go? No, that's a different kind of thinking. Last week, I was very candid in talking about another organization that we partner with, because we talk about a lot of organizations. Talked about Feed My Starving Children. Talked about how we partner with them financially, and we also partner with them throughout the year with our time and by serving for a couple of hours and making meals. And then I said, hey, on the website of GreatLakesChurch.com, you can go to our events page and you can sign up for the next time we're going to be a part of Feed My Starving Children. And in just a couple of days, almost 50 people had already signed up. This is months and months away. And I feel like saying, wait, do you understand? This is not about loopholes. This is not about how you benefit. This is not about how you get ahead in life. Nobody's going to get a paycheck from this. Nobody's going to move forward in their life because of this. This is not required of you, being an American citizen. But when we ask, hey, how can I leverage my time to help others? Man, now all of a sudden we're starting to love the way Jesus loved. Second thing here in our Bill of Responsibility, do what's responsible. What if we just said, I'm done blaming people. I'm not going to blame mama or grandma anymore. I'm not going to blame my dad. I've got these anger issues, these bitterness issues. I've got financial issues in my life. And yes, there's factors that have played into that, but at the end of the day, it is my life and it is my responsibility. What? Imagine if we looked at something that was falling apart, things were not going in the direction they should be, and we said, that is not my business, but I'm going to make it my business. And I'm going to take on some responsibility. Every so often, see stories in the news. Just read about one again this week of followers of Jesus who show up to gay pride parades. And they hold signs and they wear T-shirts that say, Jesus loves you. We're so sorry for how you've been treated by the church over the years. We just want to tell you we love you. You're valued. You are precious to God. And I'm saying, wait, hold on. Do you not understand? That's not your job. You weren't part of the generation that made people who were gay feel less than, that felt like they were not valued or considered even human at times. You don't have to apologize. As an American, you have the right to just ignore that stuff and say, that's not my responsibility. But for some reason, you've done it. Because when we take on responsibility for things we do not have to be responsible for, we show the love of Jesus. There's a third thing we could put into our Bill of Responsibilities, and simply do what's moral. Now, this isn't a talk on morality, so you get to define morality however you want. But I promise you, however you define it, if you would ask the question, not what is legal, but what is the moral thing to do, the ethical thing to do, the right thing to do, I promise you, you will come out ahead in that conversation. And then just one more. What if we just put this in our Bill of Responsibilities? Do what honors God. I'm just going to leverage my freedom to do what I believe honors God. And I don't know that I even have the right to ask you. I certainly don't have the right to force any of you. But if you are a follower of Jesus, what would happen if you just asked the question in every decision you had to make, especially the bigger and important decision, what is it that would honor God in this situation? And that might feel intimidating, right? I don't know the Bible, and I didn't grow up attending church services, and I'm not really. You don't have to know a whole bunch of Bible to do your best to answer the question, what would honor God in this situation? You might remember 3 years ago when a young man named Dylan Roof walked into a church in Charleston, South Carolina, and killed 9 people. One of the individuals that Dylan killed was Myra Thompson. Myra's family showed up to Dylan's bond hearing. Her husband Anthony was there, had nothing planned to say, wasn't going to say anything, and then he was given an opportunity to stand and say something to Dylan, and just something came over him, or he decided he was going to do it, and he stood up, and here is what her husband Anthony said. He said this to Dylan. He said, I forgive you. My family forgives you, but you need to repent. You need to confess because you got a lot of trouble right now. But if you give your life to the one who your life means the most to, you're going to be okay. Time out, Anthony. You're not thinking straight. This isn't what American citizens do. American citizens are going to get payback. They're going to get as much as they can. They're going to make him feel stupid. They're going to make him feel like he's going to burn in hell for eternity. Anthony, do you realize if according to your faith, this is not everybody else, right? According to what you believe, Anthony, if Dylan gives his life to Jesus, he's going to be in heaven along with you. Do you really want him in heaven? Someone who killed your wife, someone who killed people in the community. Are you sure you want this, Anthony? That's not good citizenship. That's not how low can I go. That's not what can I get by with. That's someone who understands that their ultimate accountability is to their heavenly Father. That's someone who says, I believe that this young man is still valued by God. So let me close with this question. What would it look like if you found ways to leverage your power and your freedom and your resources and your opportunities and your connections in a way that blesses and helps and brings hope to other people? Do you want to raise the bar in your life when it comes to freedom? Do you truly want to love like Jesus loved? In 1777, before he became president, John Adams wrote a letter to his wife Abigail. And at the end of his letter, here's what he writes. He says, posterity, future generations, you will never know how much it costs the present generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make a good use of it. If you do not, I shall repent in heaven that I ever took half the pains to preserve it. Do you want to make good use of your freedom? Then do what's helpful, and do what's responsible, and do what's moral, and do what honors God, and you'll be well on your way. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, thank you for this amazing country that we get to live in. Thank you for the amazing freedoms that we get to have. Give us wisdom on a daily basis on how to best leverage the freedoms we have to bless and help and be a benefit to other people. As your followers, give us wisdom on how to be responsible in using our freedom. In Jesus' name, amen.